is often kind of a slander against independents. If you look at, for example, the Senate races that are happening in Nebraska, in Montana, in South Dakota, the Democrats are the spoiler there. They're actually polling much lower than the independent candidates. You see that in other places as well. In California, Republicans are actually polling lower than independents are. So the Republicans and the Democrats increasingly are becoming the spoilers. And I would argue they've spoiled our entire democracy. Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 529. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. It is a wild day of news, national security, politics, culture, and I'm going to do something different. Not a full podcast today. I'm going to give you a couple of quick highlights from two media hits that I did early today. One on MSNOW that's a little left of center, and one on NewsNation that's a little right of center. I'm talking about Iran. I'm talking about Trump's fund for January 6th insurrectionists. I'm talking about the Knicks a little bit and a lot more, but there's a lot happening. I'm here in Midtown Manhattan. You can see the Chrysler building up there. The Knicks are getting ready to play in a couple of hours. The city is buzzing, but there's a lot happening that you need to know about to help yourself stay vigilant. I'm going to mix it up because this podcast is different. We're going to break the walls. We're going to break the norms. We're not just going to be in a studio or behind a desk. I'm going to take you out in the streets and I'm going to try to keep you ahead of what's happening, and not just what's happening now, but what's happening next. So here it is, a special media highlights, quick fire episode of Independent Americans that I hope you enjoy. Also, want to give a big shout out to Stephen Colbert. It's his last show tonight. I'll have more tomorrow, but he's a true class act, a guy who has always added light to contrast the heat, and I've known him for over 20 years, way below the radar. He's done a lot to support our troops and veterans. And it's especially important as we're only a couple days away from Memorial Day. So here it is, special episode of Independent Americans. If you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere else. And I hope this helps you. Stay vigilant.
Dollars from the federal government. Lindell says he lost $400 million. Enrique Tarrio wants $2 to $5 million. Again, this is taxpayer money.
I think they're trying to do two things. They're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to erase January 6th and rewrite the way the entire thing is framed for the history books and for the country. And they're trying to repeat history. They want to incentivize people to do the same thing in advance of the elections this fall. And I think that's the right thing to focus on, because that's the circuit breaker. That's the whole ball game. And he's made it very clear that he wants to disrupt the elections. He has no intent of having free and fair elections. And this incentivizes anybody who's thinking about doing something violent against the government. Go ahead and do it. Trump will have your back. If you stand with Trump against his government, he'll have your back. It's a green light. And I think it's maybe the most important thing for us to focus on, because the Democrats assume there will be free and fair elections. I don't assume that. I think it's the thing we have to focus on, because it's the most immediate circuit breaker in slowing him down and stopping him from doing much worse.
I'm going to talk about that next hour. There was apparently a big meeting with Senate Republicans and Todd Blanche. It did not go well. Alex, you were alluding to that a little bit earlier. Punchbowl has been reporting on it, and we've got Jake Sherman next hour to really flesh it out. So stay tuned for that. Paul, in terms of litigating this politically on the campaign trail, what is the message that Democrats and independents should use regarding what we're seeing here? The problem with Donald Trump in the last year and a half is that there are so many different arguments of corruption, examples potentially of corruption, examples of self-dealing potentially. I keep saying potentially. There's so many different things. It's hard to keep track of any one of them. You get lost in the sauce.
But the overall message of corruption is sticking. Yeah. And I think that's where you see populism really rising up, and especially Republicans and independents breaking the seal. And they're very, very angry. If you're not angry about this, you're not paying attention. This is what corruption looks like. But I also think it's something else. It's Plan C. If he wants to attack free and fair elections, which I believe he does because he knows they will hold him accountable, Plan A is the military and trying to invoke the Insurrection Act. If he gets no on that, he goes to ICE. Steve Bannon and others said they'll use ICE. This is Plan C. This is the angry mob, sicking them out there saying, if you go out and you have my back, I will have yours, and you will not be held accountable. And that is, I think, strategically what he continues to focus on and what we all need to continue to focus on.
So we see this. But if in terms of lawmakers, everyone that stood up from Donald Trump now has pretty much gotten thrown out. Thomas Massie, gone. Bill Cassidy, they're going to be gone soon. The ones that got a conscience and didn't want to deal with this any longer are willingly leaving. Marjorie Taylor Greene willingly left.
But also elevated. And in some ways, even more powerful because they have more appeal. They have more name recognition. I mean, we've been talking about Thomas Massie all week, and now he has a unique lane either within the Republican Party
we haven't been
or to break
about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
No, but she's talking about, she's appealing to people in a way she couldn't before. And I think you have an empowered group that are free now. I mean, you think Massie was tough on Trump before. Now all the gloves are off. And now you see someone like Cassidy, who actually broke with Trump on the Iran vote this week. Now you've got 4 Republicans that have broken with Trump on Iran, and there could be more each day, especially as the midterms come closer and someone like Susan Collins is in deeper water. So I do think you see these pieces starting to shave off within his party and outside of his party. And I think they're stacking up, especially on key votes like Iran. And if he wants to get a defense budget through at the end of the year.
All right, we're going to talk more about that next hour.
You're right, in Israel, in my opinion. I'm right now at 99% in Israel. I could run for prime minister. So maybe after I do this, I'll go to Israel, run for prime minister. I had a poll this morning. I'm 99%.
I had a question, but then I heard the end of that, and I don't really know what to do with that. Why he is so... Okay, I'm going to leave it aside. In terms of Netanyahu, is this a situation of be careful what you wish for? He wanted Donald Trump to go to war with him. He got him to go to war with them. Couldn't convince any other American president to do this. Could convince Donald Trump. And now Donald Trump might kind of leave him hanging and in a worse off position with Iran still having a regime and nuclear weapons and angrier than they were before.
Yeah, nobody can trust Donald Trump, even Netanyahu. But I think there's something bigger at play here. We're going to get a huge reminder of how unpopular this war is this weekend, because the country doesn't like this war, and it's getting worse by the day. And this weekend, we're going to have Memorial Day. We're going to be reminded about the human cost of war and how he dismissed the fact that 13 service members were killed in this war. And Americans are going to drive a lot. And gas prices are over $5 a gallon in some states, and people are going to be reminded that this war is ongoing and their gas prices are going up and they're feeling it more and more. They don't think it's worth it, and he can't spin his way out of it. I do think he's getting shackled by his association with Israel and his association with Netanyahu. You see Republicans especially distancing themselves from that. So he wants to show that he's not being pushed around. But the reality is the polls are pushing him around, and they're just getting worse by the day. And this weekend's going to make it even.
Yeah, I'm not sure that saying you can run for prime minister in Israel and win because you're so popular there really gets you farther away from the Israel issue if you need to and your base doesn't like it, which they don't.
Now, let's head over to Paul Rieckhoff, host of the Independent Americans podcast, to talk about all of this. Good to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Although I think we'd probably rather be talking about Game 2 of the Knicks and Cavs tonight.
That would be fun.
That would be a good
fun.
segment.
A lot more fun than this. This is important. We got to get to it.
That game the other night, my God. The fallout from the president's numbers, which we talk about all the time, but in particular that figure with independents. I mean, he's in the 20s with independents.
It's bad. I mean, especially as you go into the midterms. I remind everybody, 45% of the country is independent and unaffiliated. Most of them haven't voted in the primaries that we've seen happening over the last couple of months. Only 27% are Republican, 27% are Democrats. Now, Democrats are generally less popular than Trump, but Trump's going downhill fast, and I think it's about to get worse for a couple reasons. Number one, Memorial Day is coming up.
Okay.
And that's going to be a reminder about the human cost of war, and to people who don't like foreign wars and don't like what's happening in Iran, and they're going to be driving a lot. That's going to remind them about the high gas prices, over $5 a gallon in some states, and he's talking about more war. Cuba is looming over the horizon. We don't know when and if this is going to happen, but those three things I think are going to come together and drive his poll numbers down even further, which is a really bad element for all the other Republicans. And we're also seeing people leave the Republican Party. I think that's important too. 10,000 people leave the Republican and Democratic Party every single week, and I think the attacks on Tom Massie are going to drive more, especially libertarians, out of the party, which is bad for the Republicans.
It is interesting, and you're right. His numbers are brutal. By the way, Cuba, do you think we are going to war with Cuba? That wouldn't be popular either, according to the polling. I know maybe it would be in Florida, but the polling on that's not great either. Is that where
it hasn't stopped Trump so far? I mean, he also hit Nigeria this week, which most folks didn't track on, but none of this is popular. Foreign wars are not popular. A regime change is not popular. Spending all this money is not popular. But yes, I think it's more likely than not that he's going to hit Cuba. They've telegraphed all their punches already, and I think they're putting out a lot of signs. They moved a carrier over there now, and it looks like they will. The question is, will it be before or after July 4th? If I had to put money on it, I'd say it's probably going to be at a time when Congress is not in session, because he's getting even more pushback on Iran, and he doesn't want pushback on Cuba.
Right. So what I was about to say is you have all these things, right, and all these numbers and all these unpopular policies by the numbers. People say they don't like them. Okay. Now, you look at this for Democrats. I was just talking to Congressman Levin about this, but this applies to you as well, because in general, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the Democratic Party? And again, on the independents, okay, so Dem-leaning independents, they're only at 31. All right. So it's not, it's not like the other parties taking advantage. They may at the election, in the booth, but they're not right now by the numbers.
That's America. America doesn't like either of them. Right. Yeah. And more people are walking out of both parties. Young people, I think, is really an important indicator. Over 60% of young people aren't registering with either party. This is what the future looks like. The future is sick of the Democrats, sick of the Republicans. They're sick of extreme policies from Trump and extreme policies from Mondani. Many people have called them politically homeless. I would say they're politically free. They don't want to be lined up with these parties that they view as corrupt, antiquated, and just most of all, ineffective. They're not bringing
the issues thing, or is it an attitude thing?
I think I say this a lot. Independent is an attitude. And I think it's what the future looks like. People are rejecting the status quo across the board on everything from NATO to the UN to traditional, soda brands. Right?
Well, it's like anti-institution then.
Anti-institution, anti-establishment.
Right.
But also just, I think the new generation is used to having more choices. It's not just Coke versus Pepsi anymore. In 2026, we have a lot of choices online. We have a lot of choices around the world. And I think people are really looking for leaders, too, who are willing to run against all those things, stand up for them on populist issues like gas prices and foreign wars, and just be real. I think they're looking for politicians who aren't bought, who aren't real, and who aren't partisan.
That Democratic National Committee autopsy, I don't know if you, I didn't read the whole thing either. I read a summary of it. It's like 190 pages. That was a mess, too. I mean, but I guess we knew that. We knew it was a mess, but maybe it was a bigger mess. And just the idea that they couldn't even put a report together about it for this long. And even when they did, it wasn't great. They have their issues.
I think it shows why people view the Democratic Party as corrupt, too. They can't even release their own autopsy, right? To their own donors, to their own voters, to their own supporters. This is why people are leaving the Republican Party, but not necessarily joining the Democratic Party. And they're leaving the Democratic Party and they're not joining the Republican Party. And I think this is a massive jump ball. And I would point to Tom Massey this week, right?
Yeah.
Massey was actually elevated by these attacks by Trump. We were talking about him all week long. And he kind of hinted that he might run for president. People want him to run for president. Now, he could run within the Republican Party, or he could break off and try to take a third way, which would be popular at least with a significant percentage of the population.
Would it, though? That's an interesting question.
I think it would.
Because, like, you say you're an independent. I don't think you and Massey agree on very much,
No, but I think, again,
issues.
If he's running against the parties, that's enough to have a lot of people agree with him.
That's the whole point about attitude.
And I think that he's a libertarian, right? Like Rand Paul and others who've run for president before. But I think he has a very simple platform that's kind of cut and paste. He's against the war in Iran. He's against the tariffs. He wants the release of the Epstein files, and he's critical of Trump. Those four things alone make a pretty popular presidential candidate beyond partisan affiliations. And his name recognition is very high. I think he could raise a lot of money. And I think he's going to be on the playing field when it comes down to it in 2028.
But at the end of the day, we've covered so many elections over the years. Those candidates always become spoilers, for better or worse. Now, maybe that changes one day, but we ask it every time, and it's still two parties here. And I personally don't see that changing anytime soon.
I think
you would like it to change.
No, I think it's important to note that is often kind of a slander against independents. If you look at, for example, the Senate races that are happening in Nebraska, in Montana, in South Dakota, the Democrats are the spoiler there. They're actually polling much lower than the independent candidates. And you see that in other places as well. In California, Republicans are actually polling lower than independents are. So the Republicans and the Democrats increasingly are becoming the spoilers. And I would argue they've spoiled our entire democracy. They've spoiled the entire system.
So a lot of people think that, but this idea is going to be like a third way and it's going to save everybody.
It's happening, especially if you can get open primaries, if you can get ranked choice voting. California, for example, is going to be very interesting. June 2nd, there will be an open primary. So it's entirely open for millions of independents who can now vote in that primary. And the top two vote getters, regardless of party, are going to be the ones that advance. And that's going to be a good indicator of what the future could look like.
Well, that's interesting for a bunch of reasons. And one of them is, like the people in the parties were like, well, this might not be a great idea. Democratic Party, especially, say, in California. So that's a big Democratic state. And they're like, well, what if 2 Republicans finished 1-2? Now it doesn't look like it was going to happen, but for a while it did. And they were like, forget this. We got to get.
This is why both parties attack independents, because they're really a threat. On my show this week, I talked to Karen Matthews, who's running in California's 23rd district.
Okay.
It's kind of a Reagan Republican district. She's got a chance to be the number 2 ahead of all the Democrats. If she is positioning herself as the moderate option for people who don't want an incumbent that's too far to the right. Right now, she's polling neck and neck with the Democrats. She could beat the Democrats. In that district, the Democrats are the spoiler. If they got out of the way, then you'd see a head-to-head race between a Navy veteran who's a doctor against a Republican incumbent who's also not a veteran. That's when it gets really interesting. When the playing field is leveled, independents can compete, and that's happening more and more.
I think the Knicks go up 2-0. If they win the first 2, you're in business.
I'm betting on the Knicks, too. I think the Knicks are surging, and Jalen Brunson is a leader that we can all bank on.
That guy could have been mayor here without a...
Definitely would have beat everybody else who ran, for sure. He could be king by the end of this week.
As an independent, he would have won in the landslide. All right, Paul Rieckhoff, thank you.
Thank you,
Independent Americans Podcast, wherever you get your...
He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue identity, independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric and archipelago. He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.